Hello humans, today I wanted to talk about this guy right here really quickly and also use it to kind of compare and contrast between long pull versus nail nicks for slip joint knives. So first thing first, this is a Coast 3-blade slip joint knife. It was sold as a 3-blade jackknife or 3-blade trapper at different points throughout its production history. Primarily, these guys were made in the 70s as far as I can tell. It came in at least two sizes. This is the larger of the two sizes that I was capable of finding. They were advertised with stainless steel blades, which, given the shape that these blades are in, I would be willing to buy that it was a semi-stainless tool steel, something like a D2, something that doesn't necessarily rust as easily or as quickly. At the very least, it is definitely a high carbon steel. You can see because it's not developing red rust at all. It's just developing a lot of black rust, which is a little bit lower, and some people just straight up call it patina. Typically, you don't call red rust patina. Not a huge... There's a chemistry angle there that I might explore someday, but for right now, that's just what I'm going to tell you guys about it. It's not super duper interesting. Very, very simple knife, blade slightly canted forward. Here we have 3 blades. We have our main blade, which is a clip point. We have our middle sheep's foot blade. And our final spay blade. I did obviously get this secondhand from somebody who used it quite extensively doing car repairs and restoring vehicles for fun. So as you can see, it's got paint on it, Bondo, tons of crap. Spay or reverse tanto blade historically would be used for spaying animals, which is a method of rendering them infertile. If you did not know, it is a very, very important task, but you know. In terms of markings, we have a patent number on our spay blade, and then on our main blade we have Coast Portland, or Port USA, which is Portland. Our badge just has Coast stamped on it, nice and simple. We have black saw-cut Darlin handles, which was a very common plastic material that was used quite a bit in the 70s. It looks good, it's quite durable. You can still find it on some knives today, so it does seem to have held out over time. In terms of other kind of interesting things about its construction, we have true bolsters, separate pieces on there, and between each of our 3 blades we actually have a full-sized brass liner, which is kind of interesting. It's not something you see a lot, but it does do a lot to add to the stiffness of the knife, and it also prevents the blades, it keeps the blades from bending or kind of getting out of alignment with each other, so it can keep the knife feeling good for a lot longer, which is just interesting. It does add a significant amount of weight. This is not a light knife by any stretch of the imagination, but nonetheless, you know, it definitely has its uses, and I do like seeing it. So I do think that it was the right call for kind of a general purpose knife. And keep in mind, Coast blades, I mean, they're coming back now with some more premium stuff, but this is back in the day when Coast blades would have been competing with a much healthier or much more well-regarded Buck knives. Buck knives are still absolutely phenomenal. I have a collection of them. I love Buck knives, but they're generally seen as not being to the echelon that they used to be. So they're competing with a very, very strong Buck knives. They are competing with a Camillus knife company that is not a pile of steaming garbage like it tends to be today, and they're competing with a lot more smaller knife companies at the time. So this is absolutely put your best foot forward, and I do think that they did a damn good job with this. It's still very tight. Your half stop, I mean, it's not a snappy half stop, but it is a pretty nice and distinct half stop. And it snaps nicely into position. For our blade lengths, our main blade is going to be, I really should get a better ruler, about 3 1/4 inches from tip to scale, with, we'll do edge length as well probably. Oh wow, 2 3/4 inches of actual sharpened edge length. Our sheep's foot blade, again from scale, is 2 inches, right on the money, with an actual sharpened edge of 1 5/8. And our spay blade, again from scale back, is exactly 2 inches and has a sharpened edge length of about the same as our sheep's foot at 2 5/8. Some quick size comparisons. We're going to do this off of the largest blade just because that's what feels relevant. Here it is next to a Civivi Chevalier and a WE Knives Banter. As you can see, it fits very comfortably between the two, putting it at what I personally consider to be a quote-unquote medium-sized knife. I do think it fits that bill quite well. A lot of slip joints do tend to be smaller than a medium-sized knife, so there is that to keep into consideration, but here it is next to a Buck 110. As you can see, it is significantly smaller than the Buck 110, and here it is next to a Zippo lighter. Thickness, yeah, it is thinner than the Buck 110, but compared to a lot of slip joints, it's quite thick. And here it is next to our Zippo lighter. It is actually a little bit thicker than our Zippo. All right, into the interesting thing that I wanted, well, I think it's interesting anyway, into the thing that I wanted to discuss about this. Long pull versus nail nick, specifically on slip joints. On locking knives, a fuller or a long pull versus a nail nick is a whole different discussion with a whole different set of values and things you have to consider. But on a slip joint, I think that this is a lot less of a balance thing. I think that the answer is a lot more obvious. So long pulls, you see them a lot on bigger blades, and you do see them a decent amount on American-made knives. I haven't seen very many European-style knives with long pulls. There are a few out there. When you're talking historical examples, at least, there are a few, but there's not very, very many. Most are nail nicks, and a big reason for this is actually ease of manufacture. You have to remember, slip joints have been around for quite a significant amount of time. Folding knives are not new, and this is not a difficult style of folding knife to make. It's one that I've forged myself, right? And a nail nick is simply a stamp mark that you can make with a crescent stamp, which means there's a lot of historical provenance for forging nail nicks in. Especially on cheaper knives, they're a very, very easy thing to do. It's one stamp mark on the blade, boom, bam, with your hammer, move it on to the next guy in line who's going to file it down and get it to fit with your lock face, right? So that is a lot easier, whereas a long pull would be more similar to a fuller. Some smaller long pulls you could absolutely do with a single chisel or stamp mark, but a lot of the times what you have to do is you have to take a walking stamp and you have to knock it out, and then you probably have to go over it again in order to get all of your dimensioning correct. And a long pull is going to be a lot more obvious if you're not in the exact same spot each time, right? Whereas like a nail nick, your variation can be quite a bit larger, but because a long pull is longer, it's going to be a lot more obvious if, for example, the top is further away from the back edge than the bottom, right? And the crescent shape also helps hide that a little bit on a more traditional nail nick. So in terms of ease of manufacture, you definitely have to give it to the nail nick. By the time things like this are being produced, they are being produced largely on either stamps, or this would be the 70s, so it wouldn't be water jet cutters yet, but you are experiencing more mechanical manufacturing. This one here is likely stamped and then ground down, either by machine or, again, 70s probably by hand, using jigs and the like, so it would be a lot more consistent. But the historical provenance for making a nail nick will still be there. As for practicality, I think that they both have their purposes for existing. You'll typically see nail nicks, especially on smaller knives. They tend to be more common. And a big reason for that is because incorporating, it just makes more sense, right? Like it's easier to dig your nail into a shape that is the same as your nail, which means it takes up less space, which means you don't need to be as big on the blade. On a smaller blade, that can make a significant amount of difference. Larger blades, you'll see long pulls more commonly, but they're still not necessarily super common. Depends where you are in the market for sure. In my opinion, a long pull is superior, especially on a slip joint, because it offers you a lot more variety in how you open your blade, and especially on a knife like this, you don't end up with an awkward situation where you have a hard time reaching a certain blade because its access hole is covered. If this was a long pull, I could just go back here, and yes, my leverage wouldn't be as good, which would make it more difficult to open. It still would be easier than having to dig my nail around the other blade that's there, right? Which is what I have to do now, right? I'm going in basically 180 degrees and then using my nail like a lever, twisting into it to pull out. Whereas with a straight pull, even if there was something potentially in the way of my blade, I can work around it without too much difficulty. Yes, your leverage is significantly lessened, but it is still a lot easier. The other thing that is a lot easier about a long pull is on single-bladed knives. I don't have a good example with a long pull of a single-bladed knife, but with a single-bladed knife where you want to pinch the blade to open rather than dig your nail in there, a long pull gives a lot more space for the sort of meat and skin of your hand to grab onto when you're pulling. So if you have a very well polished blade, it's just a little bit easier, a little bit better traction than a nail nick can provide. There's also the argument that I think they tend to look better. I do think that it looks better imitating a fuller. I do like it when they do it on both sides. Again, this is quite a bit less common to see a long pull on both sides of a blade, but it does happen on occasion. And it looks really good. Either a long pull or even a true fuller on both sides of a blade, I think is very attractive a feature that you can see sometimes, and it makes it a lot easier to use. So whilst I do think that the argument can be more nuanced with modern locking knives, on historical examples such as this one, nail nicks they're more common. A lot of it, I do believe, is because they are easier on the manufacturing side, but I feel they are significantly inferior to a long pull. Overall, though, this knife is still very comfortable to use. It's been used and abused, right? There's lots of signs of wear and coloration on it and resharpening and this, that, and the other thing. It has a lot of character to it. The only thing in terms of the nail nick versus long pull debate that I will say is this should have been a long pull, no question in my mind, because of the fact that the nail nick is hidden behind our spay blade. Digging to it is a bit of a thing. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on the long pull versus nail nick debate, I would love to hear them down below. But for now, stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.